Okay, so this is chapter 20 on the blood. It's the beginning of your cardiovascular unit. If you look at the cartoon here, the little green guys, these are foreign entities that come into your body, and this nice big white guy, he is a white blood cell that says you're not welcome here, because that's what white blood cells do. They are going to circulate inside your body and look for anything that they don't like, anything foreign, and then phagocytize them. So kind of a cool, cute little image there. So in terms of the function of blood, you already know that blood transports everything around your body, right? So the gases are oxygen, carbon dioxide, travel in your bloodstream. Oxygen is predominantly carried in the red blood cells inside the red blood cells on a molecule called hemoglobin. We'll look at that. Carbon dioxide is largely carried in the plasma, so in the watery component of your blood. It's dissolved there, and then when it gets into your the small capillaries of your lungs, it dissolves into the air sacs where it becomes a gas, carbon dioxide gas. The wastes and nutrients are also carried around your blood. Hormones, antibodies, anything you take in right to your body is going to travel through the blood all around the body. So if we look at defense, the leukocytes and our antibodies and complement. Let's just take a look at a picture of blood. So the leukocytes is going to be the term for white blood cells. And in parentheses, I have the 5 different white blood cells that you're going to be responsible for recognizing each of their histology image. So you'll have an image of a neutrophil. You'll have to recognize that it's a neutrophil. And you will also need to know their functions of each one. So in this image, these larger, more textured cells, this one doesn't look so large, but these textured cells, this one here, those are white blood cells. When you look at them in comparison with the red blood cells are these relatively smooth discs with a little dent on both sides. That's the hallmark shape of a red blood cell. The textured cell membrane is to allow more surface area so that it can detect foreign entities or foreign molecules. So I'm going to give you a term here, antigen, A-N-T-I-G-E-N. An antigen is an antigen, so it actually stands for antibody generating molecule. And so an antigen is what your immune system will quote unquote see, right? So your immune system, like these white blood cells, they have the ability to detect the shape of different proteins, and the proteins that the immune system recognizes are all antigens. So the word antigen is just anything the immune system can recognize. Antigens can be foreign, so they can be on the surface of bacteria, they can be on the surface of viruses, or they can be yourself, right? Your self antigens. So how does your immune system know to not react to your own body cells, but to react to foreign cells? Because your immune system in its development has learned to not react to what we call self antigens, okay? SELF antigens. So your immune system learns the difference between self and non-self. And so that's what I just wanted to give you guys that information on. The word antigen, right, is this particular molecule that the immune system recognizes. So this textured surface allows a little bit more surface area to recognize antigen. So let's look at the second term, antibody. So the word antibody has been used a lot recently because with coronavirus testing, they have one test where they look for the antibodies to coronavirus. And so let me just give you guys a brief intro into antibodies. These are proteins that your B cells create. So B as in boy. The B cells, you have many, like I'm going to just venture to say millions of B cells in your body, and each of them recognize a slightly different antigen. Now, when you are infected with, let's just use coronavirus as our example, right? So you are infected with coronavirus. The coronavirus has particular antigens specific to it on the surface of the virus. The B cell that's in your body that gets to see this virus, that detects the virus, is the one that matches most closely with the antigen on the virus. So the B cell will only create antibodies after it's been exposed to its match from the outside world. So coronavirus comes into your body, all of your B cells may recognize different kinds of antigens, but the one B cell that's sitting there in your body actually recognizes coronavirus. And then that B cell is going to make many, many copies of it and then pump out antibody. So, long story short, you have to be infected with something first in order for your body to create antibodies against it. And these antibodies are very specific. That B cell that creates coronavirus antibodies is not going to create any antibodies against anything else. It's just for coronavirus. So one of the tests out there is looking at whether or not you have antibodies against coronavirus, right? Because only if you've been infected with it will you have antibodies in your bloodstream. And this is, again, a blood protein, right? So they can take a sample of blood and look for these antibodies. One of the things that's kind of interesting is that you make antibodies when you're exposed to something, but how long the antibodies stay in your body is questionable. So they don't know. And as long as you have the antibodies in your bloodstream, you're protected from reinfection or getting sick again, because those antibodies will help to destroy the virus. So how long the antibodies stay in your body is a question mark. Some infections, for some reason, you have lifelong protection, so you kind of consistently make these antibodies, and some don't, some wane. So anyways, I'm getting a little bit too far ahead of myself, but that's the basic lesson on antibodies, is that there's small proteins that are only created after your body has seen an antigen, and it's the B cells that pump out these antibodies. With complement is very similar to antibodies, except it's not made by B cells. They're proteins, and they are called complement because they complement the action of antibodies. So I'm not going to go into any detail with complement, but you do need to know that they're another protein that helps to fight infection. Okay, so your blood really has a lot of defense mechanisms in it. For letter C, regulation, platelets will form blood clots. And I just want to point out a platelet, this little guy here, right? So platelets are tiny fragments of cells. I can see another platelet here. They're sort of irregularly shaped. And they're going to help you stop bleeding. Regulation of body temperature, this is talked about in the skin and in the first unit of class, where if your blood, which is very warm, if you want to dissipate the heat because you're very hot, your blood vessels will dilate in the surface of your body and bring the more blood to your skin so that it can dissipate the heat. Or if you're cold, your body will conserve the heat to the core where your important organs are. So the skin, the blood vessels in the skin will vasoconstrict and pull the blood away from the surface so that you conserve the heat. Okay. Number 3, so there are some salts and proteins that are circulating in our bloodstream that regulate blood pressure. So because water, your cells cannot control the flow of water, so the environment that your cells are in are important to maintaining the appropriate osmotic pressure. And your blood will actually help out a lot with this, with the salt content. And this one particular protein called albumin really helps with osmotic pressure. And then it also regulates your pH. There is a buffer in your blood that's called carbonic acid. Okay, this is not written down in your notes, it's not on the slide, but I want you guys to know it. So it's carbonic acid. That's a buffer, and it regulates the pH. So what buffers do is they help your blood stay at a particular pH point. So if you have a Coca-Cola or if you have a lemonade, which is a pH of 2, your blood has to be at a pH of 7.4. If it goes to a 7 or if it goes to a 7.8, you might be in risk of going into a coma. So there's this chemical, carbonic acid, which is also, it goes between carbonic acid and bicarbonate, so bicarbonate. It will buffer the acids or bases coming into your body so that your blood maintains in a set point, the 7.4 set point. So this is a homeostatic mechanism where we have a buffer in the blood. So that's why blood regulates your pH. And the electrolytes in the blood will help regulate your sort of the electrochemical signals that we have in the nervous system, among other things. And your blood also helps to regulate the interstitial fluid. This is the fluid that goes around your organs, because it can there are only certain things that leave the bloodstream that go into your organ interstitial fluid. Okay, so regulation is also part of your blood functions. Okay, so let's move on. Let's look at some pretty pictures before I move on. So this is I don't know if I pointed this out, but this is a nice blood vessel, as you probably would have guessed. Blood cells inside the lumen, and this is some connective tissue out here. This is a hypodermic needle with red blood cells on it. Pretty interesting picture. And then this is the composition of whole blood. So we have our platelets here, right? So now we have sort of a cartoon of them. We have our white blood cells and we have our red blood cells. So notice that the white blood cells here, these leukocytes, they have very unique looking nuclei. Our lymphocyte here has basically our standard nucleus, and then this basophil is so pigmented, dotted, that you can't see the nucleus, although it does have one. So take a look at these interesting large nuclei and take a look at the red blood cells. That red blood cells do not have a nucleus. So this is also something I mentioned in Unit 1, but I'm reminding you guys again that red blood cells do not have a nucleus. They are enucleated before they leave your bone marrow so that they can be filled with hemoglobin. Platelets are not cells, they are fragments of cells, right? So we don't need to worry about a nucleus here. So let's talk about centrifuged blood. When, as a health allied professional later on, you may have a job of centrifuging blood samples, which is to spin it very, very quickly. And when you do centrifuge the blood, it separates naturally into three components. So the three components are the red blood cell component at the bottom, which is called your hematocrit. The hematocrit is how much, and this term actually is mentioned under erythrocytes later on in the chapter. So the hematocrit is the percentage of red blood cells or erythrocytes that you have, and there's a normal range for your hematocrit. Again, red blood cells are going to carry your oxygen, right? Then you have this middle fragment, which is called the buffy coat, for its color. And then this, because the red blood cells are really what give your blood the red color, when they separate away, the rest of your blood is either clear or a little bit yellow. So this white blood cells exist in the buffy coat. Platelets are also here. And then the very tiny light molecules are going to be in the plasma. So the plasma is the watery component of blood. You have all kinds of dissolved substances in there. So proteins, nutrients, hormones, and antibodies. This is where you're going to find your antibodies and complement. But one of the things I ask my students is, because when you centrifuge something, the heavier components lay down on the bottom of the test tube, the lighter components will rise to the top. So I ask my students, why is it that our red blood cells are so heavy when if we take a look at their sort of diagram or images, right, the white blood cells have this large, heavy nucleus, and the red blood cells do not have one. What makes the red blood cells so heavy? Okay, and the answer is the iron. So if you remember that iron is required in your body to carry oxygen around, it's the iron in your red blood cells. So that weighs them down, makes them so heavy. And also it's the iron that if you have ever put in like some blood in your mouth, like if you got a paper cut and you licked your finger, it tastes metallic, right? It tastes a little bit like you put a penny or a coin in your mouth because of that iron. Okay, so you can tell by looking at these different fractions of our centrifuged blood that you can tell if someone is not creating a lot of, the hematocrit is low, right? That might be a sign of anemia where you don't have enough red blood cells to carry oxygen around. This is an elevated hematocrit. So I'm not going to talk about this polycythemia, but I am going to talk about anemia at the end. Okay, so this is a nice classic sign of anemia where your hematocrit is way, way low. This is an actual image of our centrifuged blood, which is pretty cool. So we have our hematocrit down here, we have our buffy coat in the middle, and then we have our plasma with our dissolved nutrients and hormones and proteins and all that stuff up there. Okay, so one of the things they do, going back to coronavirus, if they want to find out if you have the antibodies, one thing they can do is they can separate it out and they only look at the plasma, but they don't do that actually in these quick tests. They just take a drop of blood. But if you wanted to isolate some antibodies away to make something called antiserum, then you would fractionate the blood and you would just take the plasma where the antibodies are. Okay, so let's look at our plasma and look at letter A. Consists of organic and inorganic molecules dissolved in water. So most of our blood volume is plasma. It's mostly water, and then it has a list of different dissolved things in it. So this slide you're looking at is everything that you find in plasma. So we have a group of proteins here, and then we have other things, right? So this just a whole lot of different organic and inorganic components to plasma. And then this one, let's go through some proteins. So number one is albumin. So albumin is the most abundant protein of your blood plasma. And this is the one I mentioned just before. It's required because it maintains an osmotic pressure, the appropriate osmotic pressure of the plasma, so that your body doesn't swell or lose too much water. So it's really important for maintaining appropriate blood pressure and blood liquid volume. It helps to also transport lipids and create steroid hormones. So that's your albumin. If you look at the next one, globulin, there are this one here, 35%. So it's the next one, next most prevalent. And letter A, the word immunoglobulin, is the same as antibody. It just falls under this globulin blanket category because it is the word globular protein means something. It's kind of a round ball-shaped protein. So immunoglobulins is basically antibodies. And then there's things called transport globulins that will help transport different substances around in your body. Okay. Then we have fibrinogen. So fibrinogen is going to be a factor in clotting system, and it can be converted to the insoluble fibrin. So let me just say that fibrinogen is the inactive form of this clotting factor, and when it's activated, it's called fibrin. So if you think about this sort of setup, it's really great because you always want your clotting factors to be ready and present in your bloodstream because you never know when you're going to have a cut. However, you don't want these clotting factors to be active because they could create an unwanted clot, right? You don't want clots just to form whenever. So they're going to remain inactive as fibrinogen, and only when you have a cut will it be converted to the active form, fibrin, and then at that point it will form a clot. All right, so we're going to, there's other regulatory proteins there, enzymes, some proenzymes, which are inactive enzymes, and then some hormones, right? But we covered this big three. And then we look at the other things. So just, you can peruse through and read these through, but big categories are electrolytes, which are basically just charged particles, charged ions. Electrolytes help cells maintain their activities, especially for the nervous system. And then we have, of course, our organic nutrients and waste products that we are carrying around our body. Okay, so we are good 1, 2, and 3. I'm going to stop it here and talk about formed elements in the next section.